hit like and subscribe. You're watching the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel.
Peace, family. This is your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to Night School. Every night here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, we hold Night School, where we break down the most controversial subjects, the most engaged debates, the most interesting topics going on in the world today. And tonight is no different. I want to shout out everybody here who showed up to Night School, everybody who's here to talk to us, everybody who is here engaging us in conversation, engaging us in debate. Sorry if I'm looking around. They moved some of the controls around here in the system update, and I'm sitting there like, is nobody watching? But there are lots of y'all watching. I just didn't have the number on my screen. I appreciate y'all for being here. I appreciate y'all for watching the show. I appreciate y'all for supporting the show. As always, as you know, as I said earlier in the week, we're starting a little late, as we will be next few days. Got some sick family, and we're gonna do it when we can, even if it's not when we want to. But the key is that we're getting it done, man. Shout out to everybody who's up here. Shout out to everybody who is outside, everybody who's in the classroom engaging us right now. I see you, Venetia, David. I see you, Jay, Abs. I see you, Leslie. I see you, Leslie Young. Thank you. And of course, Dallas is fine as Jazz LP. We love you and see you as well. Thanks for being here. We really, really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be talking to you all. So much going on this week, man. Some big stories in politics, some big stories around the globe that we definitely want to get to. As always, we have to think about and talk about what's going on in Gaza. Of course, we have to think about talk about what's going on here in the United States, specifically. A super interesting story, at least to me, about Florida's Black Surgeon General. We also have the West Coast governors who are clapping back. So we want to make sure that we cover all of that and get to all of that. I'm going to start in the armpit of America, Florida. Florida's top doctor just called vaccine mandates a form of slavery and vowed to wipe them all out. Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo stood next to Governor Ron DeSantis and told a cheering crowd that, quote, every last one of the mandates is wrong, that they're immoral, and dripping with disdain. He says nobody has the right to tell parents what goes in their child's body, period. But health leaders say that this move could put children, in fact, entire communities, at risk. The American Academy of Pediatrics says today's announcement could push Florida's children into outbreaks of preventable diseases. And critics warn that it may not stop at Florida. Other Republican states are watching. The state will set up its new Make America Healthy Again Commission, chaired by Casey DeSantis, who is not a doctor, by the way, start writing the rules. The big question is, will this make parents feel more empowered, or will it make them leave unprotected? Let me say two things about this. Thing number one, watching people use the word slavery to talk about vaccine mandates, it's not just hyperbole. And the fact that Joseph Ladapo, who is again Black, said it is not coincidental, nor does it insulate him from the criticism. It's quite the opposite. Republicans love to talk about liberty. The language of liberty is always used by them, not to talk about ending slavery, not to talk about ending violent dictatorships. It's not used to talk about women's rights. It's not used to talk about access to life-changing educational processes or institutions. No. They talk about liberty only when it's somebody's right to do something that causes harm to other people. It's almost always when they use it, whether it's talking about, gun ownership, not in the sense of just having a gun, but having the right to have the world's biggest gun without any consequences, and pretending that the Second Amendment is built for that reason, so I can have a bazooka. During the COVID-19 outbreaks, they used the language of liberty a lot to talk about not just the right to not wear a mask, but the right to infect other people, which is the problem. For them, liberty means individual rights at the expense sometimes of other people. And I get it. Sometimes when you're talking about these philosophical principles, there are tensions, there are contradictions, there are moments where there are uneasy ethical terrains that we have to navigate. I'm with you. I ain't trying to say it's always easy. But what I am saying is that they don't even consider some of the ethical nuances at times. They just say stuff. And in this case, to say that someone is being enslaved by forcing them to have vaccines is absurd. But also, Surgeon General Ladapo knows that. The Black Republicans know that if they call it slavery, they get to own the libs. Because as a Black Surgeon General, they're not going to say he's racist. They're going to disagree, but they're not going to say he's racist. So he's able to smuggle in this language which diminishes the impact of slavery or the importance or power or pain or devastation of slavery. But and more importantly, in this case, minimizes what happens when a bunch of people get ill or die from preventable disease based on these vaccine mandates being eliminated. And that's the point here for me. Not only is this guy saying it's slavery, which is maybe the worst medical opinion I've ever heard, whatever happened to do no harm, but it also is able to play this weird racial politics because you're Black. Now, the other piece of this, point number 2, is that this is disgusting. Vaccine mandates are there for a reason. Yes, you should have individual liberty. Yes, you should have individual rights. And honestly, if you as a parent don't want to vaccinate your kids at all, fine, but then don't let them outside, which is its own, which then we call a different bureau, right? To live in a society is to share space. What if I want to drink and I want to drive? I paid for the alcohol. I bought the car. I got the license. I want to drink and drive. We would say, and a very flat, unsophisticated answer would be, well, you can't do that because it's the law. Well, fine, vaccinating your kids is the law. In a way, we can talk about that. But that's the vaccine mandate. Eliminating it is, so I'm saying in this hypothetical, it gets a little complicated. But let's get beyond that because that's the easy answer. Also, law. Let's get to the ethics of it. Let's get to the morals of it. The reason I don't drink and drive, in addition to it being an unhealthy choice, is that I am putting other people's lives at risk by my choice. I am entering a public domain, a public sphere with a loaded weapon. I'm drunk, I'm driving this machinery, and I'm driving through town. Somebody could get hurt. And it's not up to me to make decisions about my body and my car that can impact other people, other bodies, other cars. But that's what happens when you don't get vaccinated and you go out in public, when you send your kid to school. And some of y'all are like, well, I'll homeschool. If you are not get vaccinating your kids, I don't know if you should be homeschooling your kids either, but that's different. That's my own personal opinion. That's not, no extra charge for that comment. You get the point that I'm making. But they're smuggling in this ridiculous plan. How? How, you might ask. I'm going to say it again. By using the language of liberty, and in this case, allowing a Black Republican to do the shielding. All right, let's move on to another story, because there is another story that I want to talk to y'all about. There's a banner that I'm adding. That's what I'm typing, just to be all fully transparent with y'all, because I love y'all like that. But we're going to talk a little bit about Gaza. Now, we know that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. It has been a genocide. It will continue to be a genocide until the international community does something. And we have been talking about it explicitly. But it's important to mention that the world's leading genocide scholars have now declared that Israel's war on Gaza meets the legal definition of genocide. Yesterday, or earlier this week, excuse me, the International Association of Genocide Scholars passed a resolution which, again, adds to what other countries have said, what the human rights organizations have said, what other international legal bodies have said. And that is that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. Now, we know Israel has killed more than 63,500 people. They've also wounded more than 160,000 people in the war, as they call it, on Gaza. Now, we know it's not a war on Gaza, it's a war in Gaza, it's a war on Palestinians, it's a war on justice. But in this military incursion, more than 63,500 people have been killed. The raw numbers, though, don't make it a genocide. Agreed. But I just want to give you that context. But the International Association of Genocide Scholars, which is a 500-member body, all of whom are academics. These are scholars, right? The organization's been going on for about 3 decades now, a little more than 3 decades. And 86% of them voted in favor of a resolution. And the resolution stated that Israel's policies and actions in Gaza fulfill the definition of genocide that was set out in the 1948 United Nations Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. This is important. For those of you that don't know, the 1948 Genocide Convention defines genocide in very specific terms. And it is any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And that includes killing members of the group, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Now, they damn near meet every legal standard for genocide based prima facie, just based on the eye test here. But they also said something else. They said that Israel's policies and actions in Gaza constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity as defined in international humanitarian law and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So we got the UN Genocide Convention, and then we have the ICC, or the Rome Statute specifically of the ICC. Now, among the crimes that were pointed to in the resolution, they said the indiscriminate and deliberate attacks against the civilians and civilian infrastructure, hospitals, homes, commercial buildings, etc., of Gaza. They talked about torture, arbitrary detention, sexual and reproductive violence, deliberate attacks on medical professionals, humanitarian aid workers, and journalists, deliberately depriving people of food, water, and medicine, displacing 2.3 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, demolishing more than 90% of the housing infrastructure, killing entire multi-generational families, and maiming or injuring more than 50,000 children. I'll make sure you have access to the full resolution, but this is a big deal. A lot of times, they say it's a political thing. You're an activist. You don't know what you're talking about. You haven't looked at the facts. You haven't looked at the data. They say this to anybody who calls it a genocide, but now you have a group of people whose job it is to study genocides, to examine genocides, who still waited 2 years to do it. That's not a criticism. It's to say this wasn't a reactionary decision and it wasn't a hasty decision. It seemed like they couldn't take anymore. And they made this incredibly important intervention. Now, for what it's worth, Israel responded already. They called the decision, quote unquote, disgraceful. Now, you won't be shocked at all by Israel's statement on this. They said the IAGS has set a historical precedent For the first time, genocide scholars accused the very victim of genocide, despite Hamas's attempted genocide against the Jewish people. So they're saying we're the victims here. And so there's two ways to read this, right? One, by calling themselves the victims of genocide, they're either talking about October 7th, which they may well be. October 7th was a lot of things, but a genocide it was not. Even if you decide that it was the worst thing that's ever happened in human history, if you say that Hamas's attack on October 7th, 2023 was the worst thing that's ever happened in human history, even if you believe that, I'm just saying reductio ad absurdum. Even if you believe that, that doesn't make it a genocide. Which, ironically, Israel is saying about what's happening in Gaza, right? It's like, you might not like it, it's ugly, but it doesn't make it a genocide. Or they're calling themselves the victims of genocide because of the Holocaust. The Holocaust obviously was a genocide. It is one of the worst moments in human history. It's indefensible, it's despicable. It's important to hold on to that thought without using that as a justification for committing harm later. No one has a right to kill at the scale and with the indiscriminateness that Israel is doing in Gaza right now. So that's that. But it is important to call a genocide a genocide. And that's what they did. That's what they're doing. And I'm appreciative of those scholars for doing so. And doing so in a very organized way, in a very systematic way, in a very public way, and with full transparency. Let's do it. I appreciate that. And if you're wondering why I put more experts on the bottom of the screen, it's because I don't want to pretend that this is the first time, because what they'll do is defenders of Israel will say, well, yeah, it was 2 years before we started to think about this. No, people have been calling it genocide for a long time. A lot of people with a lot of knowledge have been calling it genocide for a long time. And let's not pretend or rewrite the historical record. That's all. West Coast governors fight back as Trump politicizes the CDC and threatens public health. 3 Democratic governors just formed a West Coast alliance to protect Americans' health as the Trump administration shakes up the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and pushes anti-vaccine policies. Washington, Oregon, and California say that the agency is being politicized, putting lives at risk just as COVID-19 cases are starting to tick up. The governors promised to align immunization plans and follow guidance from trusted medical experts, making sure that vaccines and health rules are not caught up in politics. But the federal government fired back, accusing Democratic states of eroding trust with those pandemic-era mandates. Meanwhile, other states like Florida are moving to another, actually, they're moving to the opposite direction. They're phasing out childhood vaccine requirements. Across the country, states are scrambling to coordinate public health efforts for the upcoming respiratory season, and regional alliances are forming again. The West Coast Alliance will issue its own science-backed, stunning guidance, while other states decide if they'll allow the federal lead or they'll follow the federal lead or double down on local control. Americans watching this fight know that it's not going to slow down anytime soon. And I want to make it clear here that while Gavin Newsom and others are fighting, it's not East Coast, West Coast like a hip hop beef. It's Democrats versus Republicans. It's really Trumpers versus non-Trumpers. And as much as I criticize the Democrats, and they deserve every drop of criticism, in fact, they deserve even more, they're on the right side of this issue, right? Which is a low bar. It doesn't say anything about the moral capacity and fortitude of Democrats. It just says these Trumpers are monsters. They're basically saying we don't need any kind of vaccine because, again, what? Liberty, liberty, liberty. Now, my issue here is not just that they're not following the science or that they're ignoring the clear impacts that not vaccinating people on a wide scale are going to produce. But that many of the people leading these charges are not doctors. They're not scientists. They're not experts. They're just people with feelings. They're literally changing public health policy on vibes. And that's not okay. All right, y'all, we got one more story. And I'm going to share it with y'all. I'm not going to show the clip. My team might be mad, but these clips of Drake always end up getting copyrighted and I always end up getting in trouble. So I'm not going to do it. But I will say that Drake did something interesting. And of course, y'all probably know by now. Drake did an interview with Bobby. I'm sure most of y'all saw it already. It was an 82-minute roller coaster ride between Drake, Aubrey Graham, and Bobby Altoft. And Drake addressed a lot of stuff. Bobby asked Drake if he loves strippers, referencing his nightlife and his music. While he joked about his supposedly photoshopped abs. I mean, he talked about his braids. He talked about the alleged BBL. He talked about lots of stuff. And some of it was funny. Some of it he took on the chin with grace, even saying the BBL Drizzy thing, like calling himself that, right? While criticizing the coverage of it and, of course, refuting it. Drake told her that he just came from the gym and that he was sweaty and admitted that he might have overdone the Facetune, which is how he ended up looking so Abby in a way that made people feel like he got a plastic surgery. Now, BBL Drake is just funny, right? That's why people said that, right? No one actually thought he got a butt lift, but he still engaged the joke, or maybe he was trying to refute the straw man, depending on how you cynically read this. But he was saying, yeah, that when I came in, did I have a fatty? Asking her to check out his assets. And of course, she plays the whole role of like annoyed, sexually uninterested, at least with regard to Drake person, right? So there's a weird, there's a weird flirtation because they're in the bed, there's weird imagery, but she's playing the straight woman, ironically, by not being attracted to Drake. He's doing a lot of the comedic stuff. Then they have this dry comedic exchange, which I think is super interesting. I'm more of a between two ferns kind of person. I like Zach Galifianakis, but this is funny. This is interesting. I think there's moments where I want to hear more. I get reminders from these kinds of interviews with Bobby of why I'd love to see Drake in a long form interview with someone who's going to hold him accountable and keep him on his toes, but still allow space for him to be interesting and funny and charming and all the things that he is. I thought it was interesting. I think it's another reminder that these big celebrities, these uber famous and powerful artists, including rappers, are not going to do a whole lot of accountability interviews or a whole lot of interesting selections for who their interlocutor is going to be. They're not going to choose anybody off the beaten path. They're going to pick. Every game's going to be a home game. And look, I get it. If I was super famous and felt misunderstood or abused, I probably wouldn't want to set myself up for more. But I do think there's something interesting about having someone interview you who feels differently about the world, or sees it differently than you, or is willing to push you to maybe see it different than you see it yourself. And I think we get good stuff out of that. When Drake talked about why he didn't go into the beef with Pusha T further, why he didn't make a response to the last track that Push put out about his son, I thought it was interesting. Again, I'd love him to get pushed more than that interview, but even that was interesting and thoughtful, and it made me say, hey, he's a good interview subject when he wants to be. And so I want to see more of that from a variety of people. Because again, I know some of y'all hate Drake, and some of y'all think I hate Drake. I don't hate Drake. I think there are things he does that I love, and things he does that I don't feel as much. But he's definitely an interesting person, interesting personality, and I'd love to hear more from him. And I'd love for him to put out some more music, but just rap Drake, please. I love when Drake raps. I don't want Drake singing. I get that he makes hits. I get that he's a star. I'm not dissing Drake, so please keep your guns in your holsters. I'm just saying my preference is when he is just spitting, like just ahead in a cipher spit. And that's just me. Anyway, thanks for watching Night School. I appreciate y'all. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And if you're so inclined, hit that join button. Also, I'm going to ask, because I got to. It's the top of the month. We got to pay some bills, and we got to pay some old bills. So please, if you don't want to do the join option, go to Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle. Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle, and drop something in. If everybody watching right now were to drop $5, yo, we would be out of here. If everybody watching right now were to put $5 on Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle, we would be in a great place. We'd be in a great position here. So I'm going to ask you, please support it so that we can put out new content. Support it so we can build a studio. Support it so that we can hire an editor. Support it so that we can do all the things that we do. I appreciate y'all. I just appreciate y'all. That's all I can say. That's all I can say is I appreciate y'all. If you have $1, it's not too little. If you have $1 million, it's not too much. Please send it along. But if you can't send anything, that's okay too. You're still family. We love you. And we want you here. We want you to share the content. We want you to like the content. But most of all, I want you to study the content, because studying is what night school is all about. Free to land.